Like your background.
I defaulted to the old Zoom background. I'm in this like basement part of my house where the background is like it's like all this foam stuff. So we're doing this.
That's better. Yeah. All right. Well, I just wanted to say hi. I'm going to jump off and leave you guys to have a good meeting. See you later. Thanks.
Cool. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
We're still a few minutes early, so we can
Okay.
wait a bit before we really start.
How's everything? How's the weekend?
It's
What's
good.
been happening?
I was just saying to my son's nanny, she was like, "How was the weekend?" And I was like, "What weekend? Feels like it was a year ago, and it's only Tuesday." But
How old is your son?
he's 5.
Got it. My daughter is 4, and I've got one more coming in a week or 2.
Congratulations! That's
Thanks.
very soon and very exciting.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah, so 5, it doesn't get much better, huh? I feel like 2s were bad, I guess. I remember that was a tough time.
Yeah, no, 5 is so fun. He just has so much energy, and he's at the age when, like, you know, the whole class has a birthday party, and every single kid invites every other kid to their birthday party, which is great, but it means you have like 20 birthday parties. So basically every weekend there's birthday.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, okay, yeah, my daughter's she's 4 and she's in a smaller class or school, so it's not like that. And also girls and boys, I've learned, very different.
Yes, yes, that's what I observe with some of my friends' kids too.
Yeah, I know.
Right. I see it's 2, but maybe we'll wait like 1 more minute before we actually intro.
Who's the Legal Mentor Network? Is that
that's Chris
Corder?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she owns the meeting, like Legal Mentor Network owns it. So I don't think she's actually going to participate. It's just owning the space.
Cool.
All right, feels like people are starting to come in, which is great. And we're already recording because I know a lot of people register for these things and then watch the replay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, I think out of respect for the time of everybody who is here, we'll get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for this discussion between me and Alex Su, hosted by the Legal Mentor Network. So excited to have all of you here. So excited to talk to you, Alex. It's going to be great. Just very briefly, my name is Heather Stevenson. I'm one of the directors of the Legal Mentor Network. I'm also general counsel of Red Cell Partners, which is a venture firm and incubator in the AI, healthcare, and national defense space, which, if that sounds like a mouthful, we are truly doing a ton of different things, just like it sounds like. I started my career in big law, actually at Sullivan and Cromwell with Alex Su. So we'll maybe get into that a little bit because we've known each other for a while in various contexts. I quit the law entirely, opened a juice bar, went in-house at the Boston Globe, and in April joined my current job. So I've been on a kind of winding career path, which has been really fun. And I'm excited to talk to Alex about his winding career path, which is really the focus of our discussion today, because he's going to talk about more about legal ops and technical roles within kind of the legal profession without being a practicing lawyer. So Alex, thank you so much for being here. Before we get into talking a little bit more about you and your career, I just want to briefly say a little bit more about the Legal Mentor Network in case anybody isn't familiar with it. I'm guessing that many of you are mentors and mentees already, which is terrific. But the Legal Mentor Network is a relatively young, we're a little bit over a year officially, but more like 18 months to 24 months kind of unofficially before it was actually a true legal entity that matches mentors and mentees around the country in different areas just to help the mentees who might not otherwise have access to these types of mentors. So many people who are in big firms or even in huge corporate legal departments have mentors. Many people get mentors through their law schools, But outside of those contexts, that's often missing. And so we're a group of volunteer, more law students and more junior lawyers. And if anybody is not already part of the Legal Mentor Network, strongly encourage you to join. Feel free to reach out to me or Crystal or Amy, who are also on here, and we can give you more information, but that would be great. So background on that. So a little bit more on Alex, and then I'll let you talk about yourself too. So Alex, you've had what I think of as a fascinating career. You've talked about it a ton already in terms of on LinkedIn. You have really great, well, your TikToks just hint at it, your Substack. But for people who might not know you, can you tell us a little bit about sort of where you started and where you are now and the path that got you there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and I am the head of community development at Ironclad. We do digital contracting, full life cycle. We also have AI, so lots of interesting stuff on the legal tech's edge. My role at the company is kind of unusual, and I'll talk a little bit about how my career path led me there. But the best way to describe what I do is like I'm an in-house influencer for Ironclad. So it's sales, it's marketing, it's posting stuff on social media. And it's a very unusual position because it was designed for me. It's not a job I expected to fall into, certainly not when I graduated from law school in 2010. I started off my career pretty traditionally as a litigator. I clerked for a judge in the Northern District of Illinois. And then I joined the litigation department at Sullivan & Cromwell, where I met Heather. And this was almost 10 years ago. After that, I realized I didn't really want to continue along that path. And I tried a smaller firm. I joined a plaintiff's class action firm where I got introduced to legal technology. I had by then moved to California, where I saw tech really taking off. So I made the jump. I made the pivot to join a startup. And instead of practicing law, I was going to do sales. I had realized that I enjoy talking to people. I had a hunch I might be good at sales. And so I did that for 5 years. First at an e-discovery company called Logical, and then second at a contracts technology company running sales. I was the head of sales, and so I was doing a lot of different sales and marketing stuff. And somewhere along the line, I thought, well, I think I need to do something more to get in front of potential buyers. We were selling technology to legal departments. And so I started making content on social media, including LinkedIn. Over time, I started branching off into things like TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. I also hosted some meetups. And when the pandemic hit, I think my audience grew exponentially. And so it wasn't long before Ironclad reached out and said, we're thinking about a role for you. It's going to be really designed for you. Would you be interested? And I said I was. And so that was 2 years ago. And things are going great. But my current role involves sales and marketing, but also aspects of law and what's trending topics in law, as well as contracts. So it's a really mishmash of a lot of different things. And it's not something I ever imagined I'd be doing, Heather.
Not surprising, given how it was created for you. How could you have known? Before my next question, I just wanted to mention to the audience, if anyone has questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll try and take them both as they come, and we'll leave a little bit of time at the end. All right, so was there for you a sort of pivotal career moment that changed how you perceived things, where you were going, or was this more of a winding path with many pivots and none that were necessarily kind of the one?
It was a series of events, and I think at each stage, things got realer. So I'll explain. The first moment, I think, was when we were at SNC. I remember hearing about someone jumping on we were kind of pulled in on a call, and there was a partner handling something with the client. And I thought, oh, the partners are all doing really cool stuff. Us associates, maybe our work is a grind and we don't like it. But in that call, I realized that the topic was really about how privilege logs were formatted. And I realized that maybe if I continued along this path, maybe the work would get a little bit better, but not dramatically so. I wish I knew more about the various paths you can have back then, because I hadn't considered going in-house. I hadn't considered a lot of these things. My initial reaction was, oh my God, a partner is doing all this, what I call shit work, all this like dealing with Excel spreadsheets and formatting. And I was like, I got to get out of here. And so that's when I went to a smaller firm. That job did not actually work out. And then I went solo afterwards. So I tried these different things among law firms, and I realized I just really like getting in front of people and doing, working with people, selling, pitching, marketing. And so, it took a few steps, but eventually it gave me the courage to make that jump to legal tech and join a startup. It wasn't kind of a grand plan. It was more like me feeling my way through, and somehow I ended up getting lucky because I was in San Francisco in working in technology in 2016, which was kind of like an inflection point for the space.
So I'm curious, in my mind, it almost feels like the biggest space in your career is between S&C and as a solo, more than between practicing lawyer and in legal tech. How does that feel to you? And also kind of separately but related, what, if anything, did you learn as a solo that you wouldn't have in big law?
That's a great question. I don't really talk much about that space publicly, just because it's very messy. I call it my year in the wilderness. It was actually more than a year, but it was a very confusing time. When I left S&C, I said, it's okay if I make a mistake on my next job, like in terms of choosing the wrong one, but I can't make the same mistake. And that's what led me to not join another big firm. Friends had advised me, hey, you should talk to a recruiter. You should go to another big law firm. Maybe it's just S&C. That was tough. But I just, I just wanted to go do something different. That's when I went to a smaller firm. I went to the plaintiff side. And as I mentioned, that job didn't work out, but I learned a bunch of things. And when it didn't work out, I thought, hey, big law didn't work, small law didn't work. Let me try this solo thing. I've always had an entrepreneurial streak. And as your own boss, you kind of decide what you do. So it might be better. So I did that. And I remember thinking, like, very few people who worked at S&C would do something like this. And I remember you as one of the very few people, Heather, who did do something like this. There are not many of us. And some of my friends reached out. They said, it's crazy what you're doing. My friends who had stayed along the regular path, they say, it's crazy you're doing this, but I love it. And so I think the support of my friends also was helpful, the support of my family. When I went solo, I realized, okay, I was in charge of my own, what I did day to day. And I realized I really gravitated towards sales and marketing and finding clients. I did a good job of that, but I think balancing that and actually servicing the clients, doing the actual work was tough. And so I struggled to make money. And so it wasn't viable. There were a lot of reasons too, dealing with getting admitted in California. And, there was just a lot of headwinds because I was dealing with clients in New York. So all of that led to me deciding, hey, I don't think this is working. But because I spent all of this time doing what I wanted, I could no longer blame my employer for things I didn't enjoy. And what I found was that as my own boss, I really liked sales and marketing, and I was kind of good at it. And so that's what led me to the hunch that I should go somewhere else where I could use my legal experience, I could do sales and marketing, and that's what led me to legal tech startups.
Got it. That is fascinating. So we've thrown around a couple of terms, and they're even in the title of this webinar. So legal tech, and I think we've said legal ops. Can you define that for people who might not be sure exactly what we're talking about?
Absolutely. In the legal innovation space or in the legal services space, I would say typically for corporate clients, historically that work that they need to get done has been either done by themselves or by outside law firms. In recent years, there are two additional types of law companies that have serviced clients. That is legal tech companies and also alternative legal services providers. So it's almost like there's a whole patchwork of companies that can help clients do things that are not traditional law firms. And so that I would call legal tech, but also ALSPs, alternative legal services providers, as one side of the category.
Is that like Axiom? Is that ALSPs or?
Yes, Axiom is an example of an ALSP. Essentially, ALSPs are companies that take either contract attorneys or some type of outsourced staffing to serve clients. Maybe you don't need to hire an expensive big law firm. Maybe for some of your work that's more commoditized, it's better to hire someone, like a staffing agency. So, we group that as ALSPs, alternative legal services providers. And as those have grown, there's been a need on the client side, the corporate client side, to kind of manage all of this stuff, all of this work. And that's led to the growth and emergence of a role called legal operations. If you think about a corporate legal department, you have the in-house lawyers, but maybe you need people who can understand software, processes, systems. That's what we call legal ops. And so they are the buyers, or at least they shepherd the process of buying services from ALSPs or legal technology companies. And so they support the GC and the AGCs, the deputy GCs, who are doing the law work within a legal department. The legal ops folks are dealing with process questions.
Got it. Okay. And then who would you say is kind of the ideal person to work first in legal ops and then in legal tech?
I think it really comes down to what you are good at, what you enjoy. As I mentioned, I liked selling and marketing, so it lends itself to a natural fit for somebody who is selling and marketing legal technology. So if you're you're into that, that's on one side. The other side is if you are analytical, if you are very process oriented, legal operations might make sense for you. And you could be a lawyer, but you certainly don't have to be. Although I think most of you here are, maybe all of you here are lawyers. It's just an emerging space where the real competency is are you process oriented? Can you do change management? Can you convince older traditional legal departments to adopt new ways of doing things? That's really tough. And so almost like, if you want to sell technology or services, you go to the outside legal tech companies or ALSPs. And if you are good at, or if you are interested in selling internally, then that's legal ops.
Got it. Okay. And so then in terms of the legal tech space, that's obviously a world that you've, immersed yourself in both professionally and I think to some extent as a personal interest, right? I think you've said you've done some angel investing in the space as well.
Yeah, I have.
And obviously the companies you've invested in is some of it, but what are you excited about in that space right now?
So what I'm most excited about right now is how AI can be applied to all sorts of work that have traditionally been done through manual processes. So the best example is Ironclad, the company I work for. Lots of contracting used to be done either via paper or, getting an email from somebody in the business saying, hey, I need a contract for XYZ. That has been automated by companies like Ironclad. And the application of AI means that we can do things like highlight certain parts of the contract that have issues instead of having to read it manually. There's also the ability to extract key information like expiration dates or party names from a contract, or like where the indemnification clause is. So I think the AI application to traditional manual legal processes, I think that's super cool. And that's a reflection of some of the companies I've also invested in. A few examples, one of them is Justice Text, and they do AI for video evidence. And they help public defenders and criminal defense attorneys. Another is called BriefPoint, which is AI for discovery responses, because as you know, in litigation, there's a lot of creation of documents going back and forth, asking for information. That process can be automated too. So I think if you think about the lawyer's job, a lot of that stuff, once you go into practice, and some of you may know this, once you go into practice, you realize, oh my God, this can be automated. And so I think that's what's happening right now. It's happened in other areas of the business world. It's taken a bit longer for law, but it's certainly happening now.
Yeah, on the discovery piece, it's so funny. I remember working for a client when I was at SNC, who you may have worked for too, I believe, but who had like canned ROG responses, and you weren't allowed to change them, but you had to match them to the correct interrogatory. And just thinking like the hours of young associate time that went into doing that could be done by the simplest algorithm. Now, I'm sure, because it was literally, here's the response, here's the type of question that it goes with.
And that's so funny because I know all of us probably had that thought in our heads, like, there's probably a better way to do this. And I think that, lawyers generally are traditional. We like to do what works. There is also the effect of the billable hour where maybe there's less of an incentive to improve the process. But if you can imagine, like when we were children, like, do you remember when like the teachers would tell you, you've got to memorize the multiplication table, because if you don't know how to calculate the cost of your groceries, because you're never going to always have a calculator with you in your pocket at all times. That's changed. We all have iPhones with calculators. So I do think that when the broader world adopts new technology, it's going to take a bit of time, but some of the things that we were taught and trained on when we were younger, whether in law school or in early years of practice, that may change through the adoption of technology around the world.
Are there areas of the legal practice that you think kind of can't be improved by technology? Or, I know you've said AI won't replace lawyers, but kind of what are the areas that are less ripe for innovation, I guess?
The more routine and tedious and repetitive the task is, the more likely it is to be replaced. The more bespoke, custom, and dealing with humans, whether it's counseling or advising, the more it involves that type of work, the less likely it is to be replaced. And I also think that the most highest value transactions or litigation, that's also not going to be replaced. So I'll give you a few examples. Trial work, courtroom work, probably not going to be replaced anytime soon. Advising on high stakes M&A, probably not going to be replaced anytime soon. But I don't know if you've had this experience, but some types of real estate practices, like if you're buying a house and you look at the contract that your real estate attorney prepared for you, and you're like, this was just copied and pasted from another template, that's probably at risk. So I think that there are a lot of practices that fall within that continuum of those two extremes. And so the ones that are most at risk are those who are running practices based, again, off of tedious, manual, repetitive work.
That makes sense. Okay, so on this call, I assume have a number of people who are interested in what it might look like to work in legal tech. Can you talk about what some of the jobs are that people who work at legal tech companies do?
Sure. At technology companies, you really have two basic functions, and everything falls within these two categories. You're either building the product or you're selling it. And building can involve engineering, like programming, but it can also involve things like product management, guiding the product's development, like which features you add over time. That requires a deep understanding of what customers want. So, it's very, it can be useful for someone with a law background to advise and guide this process. So I would say product management is one area. And then on the other side, you have selling, which involves sales, marketing, and what we call customer success. It's all different parts of the same thing, which is essentially getting the product into the hands of customers and making sure that they're having a good experience. Marketing is, creating content to get people's attention. Selling is having those conversations to convince people to sign a piece of paper or a document saying they're going to buy the product. And then customer success is just managing customer relationships and making sure that the lawyers who are using the product are successful. So there's a range of different types of jobs, and a lot of this stuff really isn't really taught or isn't really talked about in law school. In a technology company, you just need someone to translate the law stuff to technology people. If you feel like that's something you might be interested in, and it ties in with some of your strengths, like whether dealing with people or designing a product roadmap, then I think there could be an opportunity.
And among the jobs you just listed, are there certain where being a lawyer is either a requirement or a benefit or less common?
I would say it's never a requirement.
Okay.
Having said that, it's going to be hard for someone without litigation experience to advise how to build a litigation analytics tool. So I don't know, they have this term JD Advantage. I guess you can use that. JD Advantage, you do benefit from it, but really instead of your credentials, what it comes down to is what is your experience? And this is where I think law students might have a harder time, because unless you have some experience from law school, essentially what you'd be doing at a tech company is essentially what anybody else can do, because you haven't had that substantive legal experience. So I always advise people, hey, do a law job for a while. If it doesn't work out, then you make a move. Unless you're certain you want to do legal tech or something in legal operations early on, in which case you probably will have done some clinics, you would have gotten some experience in law school, then you're bringing something to the table. I think the type of work that you need a lawyer least would be sales, like pure direct sales. Incidentally, that's the place I went into, and maybe because I have a firsthand experience of what that's like. Because what happens is when you join a startup, they don't know how to sell the product. They need someone with experience in law to help sell it. But over time, how you sell something becomes standardized. And so you can start plugging in people who don't have that legal experience to sell it, which is why if you look at a company like Thomson Reuters or Lexus, like while they do have a lot of sales reps who are lawyers, there are also a lot of salespeople who are not, have no legal background. So, I think that's an area where it might be less relevant.
Got it. And just to dig in a little bit more with a specific question from the audience, from Shreya, I'm an LLM graduate and I don't have a bar license in the US, but I have in India. Thinking from, imagine you're on the recruiter side, what do you think the recruiter would be looking for in an applicant?
That's a really great question. Yeah, I think it's tough because it really depends on the size and stage of the company. I do know that startups may also struggle with the resources to bring in someone who might not, who might be coming from another country. But for more mature companies, I think what you want to target are, companies that have a need for your skill set. So for example, if the company is working on a problem related to contracts, if you have contract experience, I think that company could be a good fit. And you can also look at what openings they have to see what you would enjoy. Domain experience essentially is what you would be bringing to the table. So if you're applying, I would look at what your experience has been and position it to specific companies that are working on that problem.
And now I know, for example, if you are a lawyer who wants to lateral to another firm, there's usually a pretty clear path to doing that. There are recruiters you can work with, those jobs are publicly posted. If somebody is wherever they are, I guess it doesn't matter. If somebody is interested in getting into a legal tech role, how do they find those jobs? How do they apply? Is it one of those things like with the big tech companies where you apply on the website and your resume just disappears forever unless you know somebody?
I mean, you can do that too. You can apply on the website. Although I do think that unless you have a compelling resume to that company, it's probably going to disappear. So again, for example, using my example before, if you have a lot of contract experience and you apply to a contract startup, they may reach out to you. Beyond that, networking is huge. I think meeting people in the space, engaging with them, both in person and online on social media. LinkedIn is great for this. Engaging with them will get you in front of the right people and they'll know that you're looking. So that's one way to do it. Another is to kind of take a more sales approach. And this is not for everyone, but it's certainly what worked for me. I looked for companies that I was interested in. I would review kind of the blogs. I would see who was doing interesting stuff. And I would say, that looks like an interesting company. And I would cold outreach to the CEO and say, let's chat. And when you chat, you understand what they're working on and you can kind of position yourself. It is a bit more aggressive. It is a bit tougher, but that's what worked for me. Like I have not really, it's been a while since I applied through a job posting. I have found that if you can talk to the CEO or someone who's making the hiring decision, you can bypass a lot of the BS that comes with like just applying on a website.
Yeah, and just to dig in a little bit on that, because I think not everyone is as comfortable doing that as you've gotten to be over time. How do you do that? I don't know that I would even know how to go talk to the CEO of a tech company.
It's kind of the part of the sales training that they always say, like, you want to reach out to the decision maker. So first you have to, again, LinkedIn is the best place to do this. Make sure your profile is built out and designed in a way that makes you look good to the person who might hire you. So for me, like, for example, I was doing, I wanted to show off my legal plus sales experience. I made sure that was highlighted in my LinkedIn. And then I subscribed to a tech newsletter that would tell me which companies had just raised money. This is going to get really like insidery baseball, but like, because when companies raise money, they're gonna start hiring. Like the investors want the companies to do something with that money. They want to hire people. So that if someone just raised money, they probably are looking to hire. And so it's not hard to go on LinkedIn and find that company's CEO and just cold message them and say, here's what I am, here's my background, would love to chat, and keep it general.
And did you message them on
to,
LinkedIn or did you try and find their email?
It was LinkedIn.
Okay.
It was LinkedIn. In tech, people are very active on LinkedIn, especially around the legal tech space. You can do email too, I guess, if you can find it. Email is just typically harder. What's nice about LinkedIn is that they will see your face. They can click one click and see your experience, and they can quickly decide if they want to talk to you. And so I've done that a few times. Certainly, I mean, it didn't work all the time, but where it did work, what happened was, and this is what I think is really interesting about job searching that I didn't realize, which is when you get into those conversations, sometimes the job you think you're best suited for isn't what they're looking for, but they will say, hey, actually, you might be better for this bigger job or more uniquely designed for you job. And so I think that just putting yourself out, and this is why networking is so powerful, just putting yourself around a lot of people. People can also find places for you. So I think networking is incredibly important.
And a lot of what you're describing, I think, is typical in startups kind of across the board. Is all legal tech still in its infancy, such that like every legal tech company is also a startup? Are there big legal tech companies that you would think of as no longer in that phase?
There are a few. I would say most are in the smaller side. Ironclad, I think, in the contract space is probably the biggest, probably the most successful. There's other ones like Thomson Reuters and Lexis. I always refer, I mean, they're legal research, but they view themselves as technology too, but they do other things. Most of the companies in this space are early. We are still kind of in the early stages of this industry and field, and that creates a lot of opportunity. And so, again, more insider what's happening on tech, like more inside baseball on what's happening in tech. Later stage startups are seeing struggles in fundraising. So, but at the earlier stage, and when I say earlier stage, I mean what we call seed stage or pre-series A, they're getting a lot of funding, and so they're probably going to be doing more of the hiring. So the takeaway is focus on earlier stage companies because they might be the only ones who have the funds to do a lot of hiring right now. That may change in the next 6, 12, 24 months, but that's what I'm seeing right now.
Got it. Okay. And on the networking question or point, we have another specific question from Matthew. Should people visit the expo hall at ABA Tech Show to network with legal tech companies?
Absolutely. ABA Tech Show is fantastic. Exhibit halls are great places because that's where you can meet a lot of CEOs. You can meet a lot of people who are, you'll find companies that are doing things that you never realized. Even someone like me, I follow a lot of tech companies, legal tech companies. I go to these events and go to the exhibit halls just to see what's happening, because sometimes you'll find a smaller company that's like on the verge of breaking out, and that's how you kind of stumble into them. Plus you get to meet people there, so you build connections. So I would say going to ABA Tech Show is a fantastic idea.
Are there other conferences people should go to or newsletters they should be signed up for, like just places to learn about this space?
Absolutely. So on conferences, I would say, depends on where you live. Legal Week is one that's, I think, is going to take place in March. That's in New York City. That's a great one. There's also CLOC, the Legal Operations Conference. That's going to be in May. That one is in Las Vegas. But generally speaking, I think if you follow a few of these, there are a few bloggers and thought leaders who post on this. In particular, I think of Bob Ambrogi as one. Another one is Artificial Lawyer. They always write about startups and conferences. And so once you follow those blogs, you'll start to get up to speed on what's happening and what events are happening where. Events, just like startups, like there's always new ones popping up, and they're kind of trying to plug in the gaps for the older ones. So there's a lot of different ones, but a few other ones, like I think of like ACC, like a traditional law conference may have an exhibit hall that you want to check out. So it doesn't have to be just a legal tech conference.
Got it. And a good follow-up here. Any recommended legal tech podcasts?
Bob Ambrogi has a great podcast. There are a few others. I'm trying to think of which ones that focus on. I think start with Bob Ambrogi. I don't know if there's a way I can drop a link or find a link, but for those of you who don't know, it's called. I think there's a partnership with Above the Law. Above the Law is another great place to look at. They always post about legal tech, and Joe Patrice there writes about legal tech too. So, and I think they have a podcast as well. So Above the Law and Bob Ambrogi.
Great, thank you. All right, well, just because I'm looking in the questions, I'm gonna pivot a second to this question for you.
Yeah.
Where and how can one acquire the training and skill for product management?
That's a really great question. I don't have firsthand experience with this, but if I were doing it over, like if I was trying to break into legal tech into product management, I would look for an early stage startup that basically needs my domain expertise because in the beginning, one thing that trips up a lot of lawyers and law people is that we look at our credentials and we think that we're entitled to a position that pays a high amount or it has a senior position. When you go into startups, you realize that product management is nothing like law and you don't have that experience. So you're just like a new person. But that doesn't mean you can't add value. Again, if you are, if your background is in trust and estates and you find a trust and estates focused startup, you don't go in by saying, I want to be a senior product manager. You go in by saying, I know a lot about trust and estates and I can help you. And it has to be a startup because if they're more successful and they're bigger, they probably have hired experienced people for that role. You go in early and you're a generalist, you solve a lot of problems, but because you have that domain expertise, you are valuable. And in exchange, you tell the founders or the CEO, like, I want to focus on product management and you'll do and learn at the same time. That's the best way to grow into that type of role. That's incidentally what I did. I didn't have any sales experience, but I brought my domain expertise into an early stage startup. I learned as I contributed. And I think that's something that's a really underrated path for a lot of lawyers, because we as lawyers tend to think, if I've made $250,000 a year and I was a third year associate, I should go into something that pays equally as high when I go into a startup. That's not going to happen.
For people who are considering this, what should they expect in terms of starting salaries for roles like this? And is a lot of the comp in the form of equity, as with other startups?
I would say, I'm going to give the lawyer response, right? It depends, but I'll give you some ranges. I think in the junior levels, if you're starting from scratch, it's probably going to be under 100K. But there are specific specialized roles where you can get to 100K to 200K pretty quickly. For me, I basically, it took me probably 2 years. And, I think I did a dramatic kind of pivot. I would not recommend it, but I went from I went all the way down to an entry-level salesperson, getting paid like 55K per year. And I'm just using like numbers from 2016. There was a variable component, but sales is interesting in that it's performance-based. So if you do well, you make a lot quickly. So within 2 years, I was making basically the same amount as I did as a lawyer. But for other roles, it may take longer. I think that as you also navigate the space and as you create more value by becoming more of an expert, you can make trade-offs. You can say, I'm going to take less cash compensation and take more equity. It really depends. I will say that a lot of folks in this space do take a lot of equity because while a lot of these startups, they don't have a ton of cash to burn because they're always, they're trying to make it to the next round of fundraising. They don't have a lot of cash to burn. So if you can come in cheap on the cash side, very often they will give you equity. And then if and when the company succeeds, your equity would be worth far more than your cash. So it's almost like you become a mini investor, but obviously that comes with a lot of risk. So it really depends on, where you are in life.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And is there we'll back up. Your career path has been very unique and you've ended up in a role that was created specifically for you. That likely won't be the case with everyone. Is there a typical career path for example, a product manager? Like if you start as a junior product manager, do you become a senior product manager? Do you then go do something else? Is that what you do for the next 20 years?
It's not what you do for the next 20 years, and everybody always pivots. One thing that's very different about tech than law is that switching is not only acceptable, it's also encouraged. The companies' needs change all the time and they want to keep their people because in the startup ecosystem, changing jobs every 2 years and 2 years or so is super common. I think in law, you want to stay longer, or the longer you stay, the better it is. But in tech, it's like people are always changing. So it really is the network you're building, the expertise you're building, and down the road, you can always switch. I went from a sales type of role to a marketing type of role, but at many stages along the way, I could have switched into a lot of different things. So it's a great place to experiment if you can, again, handle the chaos, but often people who struggle within a more restrictive law firm environment tend to do well in startups, and vice versa. If you really like that structured environment, maybe a startup isn't for you.
First, quick follow-up question. If you're moving every 2 years, moving companies, do you lose your equity every time?
No.
So
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that's unique. I think in most startups, if you leave after 2 years, you have to say goodbye to the equity.
So typically what's common, and there's some variations on this, is that if you join a startup, you have to, you get equity that's vested over 4 years. So you don't own the shares until at the end of 4 years. Having said that, the common pattern is to say you have to work there for a year first for any equity to vest. And once it's vested, then after that, you vest every month. So for 2 years, you made it past the first year mark. We call that a cliff. So you get the equity, and then every month you accrue more equity. And then at the end of 2 years, you can take your equity with you. Now, you do have to, very often when you leave a company, you do need to exercise your options. These often come in stock options, not actual shares. So it does kind of require you to invest and pay for your exercise of your options, but you can bring it with you. So for me, I've been at 3 different startups in the last 7 years. I have equity from all 3 companies.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Something that I'm very curious about, just because I'm now in the incubator space and we obviously have our thoughts on people leaving with equity. And how you want to.
So I'll add one more nuance, Heather, which is that there are some companies that have experimented with like 1 year, like you only get equity vested over 1 year, and then later they'll add it. So there's a lot of variations that may be different, and maybe you can't bring it with you. But what I will say is that what I just described has been common. Like it's the basic scenario, and then certain companies deviate from it.
Got it. All right. I find that fascinating. Hopefully someone other than me also is curious about that, because it's a little in the weeds. So what is your favorite part, or what would you say is, if not personally your favorite, the best general part about working in the legal tech industry?
I think that it's just such a big opportunity. It's not easy because, as we all know, lawyers are not fast adopters of technology. But what that means is that, unlike the other spaces, there's a lot you can do. So for example, if you're like, I don't know, in finance and you're in tech and you're in fintech, everyone's there. And it's so, it's just such a, how do I say this? It's like, there's not a lot of opportunity because there's so much competition. In law tech or legal tech, it's not something that many outsiders gravitate to. So if you have a legal background, you can really have a big impact. And so I really like that. It began with me just being able to translate like the typical workflow of a lawyer to the technology people and vice versa. But over time, it's evolved to like making jokes to promote like a technology. So there's room to maneuver. And I think that for anyone considering a move into like a legal tech startup or the startup space, once you get in, like what I'm describing right now is very general. Once you get into the job, you will find all these challenges and problems that basically no one knows how to fix. No one knows how to address. Startups are strapped for resources. So if you go ahead and solve the problem, no one's going to say no. That's very different than like a law firm, where if it's not in your lane, it's probably not okay to do it, right? You don't want to cross a partner or something and they say, hey, you got to wait 10 years before you can be a partner, and then maybe we'll let you speak at a meeting. In a startup, it's like, we don't have enough people to do all the work. So if you can go and run off and find a solution to your problem, go and do it. That's how I built my social media platform, because when I was selling, I realized it was really hard to get in front of lawyers, and I needed a clever way to like reach people without cold calling or cold emailing them. Nobody told me no. And so I started posting on LinkedIn, and it started driving sales conversations. And that wouldn't have happened at a law firm. It's because at the startup, they were like, hey, go do it, Alex. Like, we haven't figured it out, so you go do it. Plus, the startup was trying to make a name for itself. And so the social media activity was helping them. So I do think that if you solve problems in an unstructured environment, you can really develop expertise that makes you unique. And I think that happens over time.
And so I would imagine that same kind of strength of being in that space where it's unstructured, where you can just go do, you see an opportunity and you take it, is also a potential downside depending on the person who's doing it, in the sense that nobody's
Yes.
going to tell you how to do things.
That's right. No one's going to tell you how to do things. I remember my second startup, my first day was like assembling tables. It's crazy. It's just crazy, right? It's just so different. You also, it does feel a little risky, although I think it's less risky than people think. There are constant layoffs. There's less job security specifically to the company than there is in something like law. But having said that, it is the ecosystem that gives you job security, because people switch all the time. If you see that, in the news, like big tech is laying off people, like, Google, I think let go of a bunch of people yesterday or the day before. Those folks will find jobs no problem. And so your job security isn't tied around one company, it's tied around the ecosystem. And that's something that's very different than in law.
That makes sense. And it sounds like once you get into that space and into that ecosystem, as you described it, there will be opportunities for somebody who's not yet there, whether they're a law student or, perhaps a junior lawyer. Are there law school classes that you'd recommend, or opportunities for junior lawyers to experiment with that would kind of prepare them to, in a sense, compete against people who are already in the ecosystem for jobs?
Yeah, I think the biggest strength you can bring to a startup before you're in the space is domain expertise. So whether it's your practice area, like if you're a bankruptcy attorney, and you really like that stuff, you should really get deep into it, find out who's working in the space, maybe advise them, work with them, get to know them. I think domain expertise is your biggest in. Once you're in, you'll develop these other skills that will set you apart, but that's always going to be the case in the beginning, your domain expertise. And so carving out time to get better and understanding that problem space you're in can be helpful. So like if you're interested in, I don't know, tech transactions and you want to do something in tech, maybe find out, who is serving clients in that space. It could be law firms, but there are several startups that are trying to, for example, automate some of the fundraising documents, or, doing a lot of different interesting things. As a lawyer, you have a unique vantage point to kind of advise and work with people in the space before you make that jump.
Okay, that's really helpful. And so I think the answer to this next question will probably touch things we've already talked about, but I want to make sure I haven't missed anything by not knowing what to ask. So here's my question.
Yeah.
We rewind, you have no experience doing anything. You've just graduated from law school, or say you've clerked and you're at SNC and you decide you want to get into legal tech. Mm-hmm. What are the steps you take in the short term? Because you probably, maybe you can just make the jump, I don't know. And the longer term, if it's not something you can do immediately, to position yourself to do that. If there's anything we haven't already touched on, it may be that you've talked about everything.
There's a lot of tactics that I've shared, but I think the core, I think where you're getting to is like, what are the core principles of like how you prepare yourself to make that jump? Is basically you need to understand what you're good at and you're bad at, what you like and you don't like. A lot of people skim over that and they just kind of jump on Indeed or LinkedIn and say, let me find a job that will solve all of my problems that will be perfect for me. That's not the right way to go about it. First, you need to figure out what you're good at, what you're bad at. And what I haven't shared about my story is that my hunch about sales came very early on. Everything good that happened in my career was because I talked my way into something. I got my SNC job, my summer associate job, because I met an associate at OCI and I just chatted her up, and I had a GPA below the cutoff. I later learned that we had a high cutoff GPA for the firm. I just got in because I just talked my way into it. I got my clerkship. Again, I was below the GPA cutoff. I talked my way into it because I was networking at an Impulsa event and the AUSA I spoke to got appointed. I worked on a political campaign between my clerkship and going back to SNC. I realized that I was they told me to make cold calls and I realized I was really good at it. So I had all these little data points from my history that I was like, oh, I'm good at this. And what was I bad at? I look back at everything I'd done. I was not good at being detail oriented. I would make mistakes, right? When I would write papers, I would skip words, like in sentences, or I'd forget to put a comma certain places. So by the time I made the jump, I had a pretty solid understanding of what I was good at and bad at. That understanding gives you the conviction and confidence to make a pivot eventually. Because if you're running away from a job you're unhappy at, it's probably not going to be solved by finding the perfect job description somewhere and getting that job. It's probably going to be finding work that you're aligned to, that you've always been work that you're, type of work that you've always been interested in, that where your weaknesses don't matter. And I think that is something that most people miss out. They always ask, tactically, how did you make that jump? How did you make that pivot? Well, it's because I had hunches about myself and I acted on them. And so I would give that advice for everyone else trying to make a move too.
Got it. I think that's really useful advice, and something as lawyers we often and law students don't do enough of, because we focus so much on did we figure out how to get the grades, which is relevant, but not really after a couple of years out of school. And it's almost more important, how did you get the grades, if that's the decision, then or how did you get into the firm, how did you get the clerkship, then what's the result. So that's really interesting. We have about 10 minutes left. So anyone in the audience who has questions that you'd like to ask, please be sure to put them into the question box now. I'm continuing to watch it. And in the meantime, while we see if anyone has questions, Alex, are there other topics that you are hoping to talk about, or any other advice you wanted to share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the years, I think I've become really interested in 3 topics, and I write about them on my Substack. Number one, I want to talk about the unspoken rules of the legal profession. If you've seen my TikToks, I make a lot of jokes about law firm culture, but there was a lot about law firms that I didn't realize when I was going through it. And so I like to write about it. I didn't realize the impact of the billable hour, for example. And so unspoken rules is a big area of interest for me. And then secondly, I'm very interested in sales as a former salesperson, but also, why is it that at law firms, the partners who can bring in new business seem to have it all? And the people who are actually really good at doing the work seem to get overlooked and passed over. That's, again, related to an unspoken rule that I never knew about. And then third, I'm very interested in technology and how it's going to impact the practice of law. Right now, the conversation is being dominated by AI, but I do think that technology is changing a lot of things. And so I think all of these 3 topics are related to one another. And this year I placed an extra focus on writing on my Substack. And so for those of you who haven't checked it out, it's alexofftherecord.com. You can see some of my writing there. I try to promote it because everyone sees my social media stuff, but very few people see my newsletter. So I thought I'd make a quick plug for it.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. Is on those important topics, is there anything you wanted to dig in on any of them? I mean, do you want to talk about why it is the people who are making partner are not the people who are doing the good work, or did you just want to kind of share that that's a topic of interest?
Yeah, so I write a lot about, so one of the areas that I write about is how to take the principles of legal tech sales and apply them to a law practice. So I write some stuff like that, like, here are some tactics you can engage in. But the question of why, I don't know. And I'm very curious about why. It's not just law, it's also in business. If you're a salesperson who brings in revenue, for some reason, you can have your cake and eat it too. I have some hunches about why that is. Revenue is the lifeblood of a company, but so is a lot of other things. For some reason, sales is celebrated and so important. And so on the one hand, I think it's something you've got to accept. Selling isn't always just selling to customers, but also, or clients. It's also selling internally, convincing executives to make a certain decision. So selling is always going to be important. I don't know why that is, but I do think that with technological change, a lot of things will be disrupted. And that's why I think the unspoken rules part is so important, because, we may be taught, if you put your head down and do a good job on all of the work that you're given at a law firm, you will make partner. I don't know if anybody still believes that, but I believed it when I was younger, and I realized, oh my God, there's all these other things that you have to do too, and the rules seem to keep on changing. And so, again, all of these things are interrelated. Part of my writing is to figure out, my own thoughts and learn from other people, because when I write something, people will comment and share their view. So, I don't really have anything in depth to share, but I do share my thoughts on the Substack. So check it out to see kind of the latest. And I also comment on legal news and technology developments.
Yeah, everyone should definitely check it out. And Alex has it set so that you can read his post before you decide whether to subscribe, which is really nice. It drives me crazy when people make me subscribe. You'll inevitably choose to subscribe, but you can check it out before you're signed up.
Heather, I should clarify, like my newsletter is unpaid, so I haven't turned on the paid subscription feature. So anybody who you can read everything that's on there, and I've written for probably 15 months now or so. Yeah, so you don't need to pay.
Yeah, no, even when you don't need to pay, it's my email. I don't want like emails I don't want. It drives me nuts from some people, but not you. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, we have some questions. My CEO sent me here, first employee at a legal tech using AI for patent search. Thoughts on growing the startup with sales with no law background? How can I improve my sales skills without any legal knowledge? Interesting.
That's a really interesting question. Well, here's what I would say. You were probably hired because you brought something to the table, and I don't know what that is. It may be, I don't know if there's sales experience or other experience that you've had. Part of early stage sales, like early stage startup sales, is very different than traditional sales. It's less like a pitch and more like a conversation and evangelism. So be personal, get in front of potential clients and just talk to them and have conversations. You do develop that expertise on the job, but what you can bring to the table in the beginning is just that enthusiasm and excitement for the technology. Your CEO probably understands that you don't have that legal background, and so he or she will help out with the sale. But in the beginning, your enthusiasm and excitement and engagement, that's what you bring to the table. That's what I would recommend.
Great advice. Thank you. And then this is a good, very specific question. How does a tech company conduct interviews, and how is that different than hiring for a law firm role?
I can only speak to my own experience. Tech interviews are very ad hoc and variable. I have seen the more junior the position, the more random the interview process will be. Sometimes it's one conversation with the CEO, and within a few minutes, the CEO immediately decides whether they like you or not. That's certainly happened to me. Or as a more senior role, there's going to be a lot of interviews, and that's happened to me too. I think that in a law firm, it's almost like hiring is done in a way that pigeonholes you into a specific job description. Whereas at startups, they're looking for people who can grow with the company, who might be good at multiple things. So the interviews are going to be different. It's going to be less structured for a startup. Again, that's really, I don't know, I'm generalizing a lot here. Again, there are certain exceptions. Like when I joined Ironclad, I think I interviewed with like 13 people. It does vary, but the earlier the stage, the more junior the role, the more gut feel by CEO is the process.
Great, thank you. Oh, I think.
Yep, you're welcome.
All right, we have time for one more question, I think. So I'm currently an IP paralegal at a law firm. I'm interested in shifting my career to project management. What are some projects I can take independently or within the firm to make the shift more seamless and make myself more appealing to legal tech hiring managers or CEOs?
So it all ties back to domain expertise. I think that the projects that are related to that, if you're an IP paralegal and you're interested in sort of the IP innovation space, of which there are multiple startups focused on that problem, I think getting deep into the IP is probably your best bet. The project management skills will come as they come when you're at the firm, and taking on projects related to IP, I think will be helpful, because then you'll get a deeper knowledge of IP, that specialty you have, and then you can bring both project management and IP knowledge to the startup. And when you're looking at a startup, I think I would focus on startups that focus on that area. So if for some reason you're interested in, I don't know, contract startups, then maybe you want to try to do a contract-based project management matter. So I think domain expertise is going to be your guiding light. Again, that's why the startups would hire you, not because necessarily you have functional expertise like sales, marketing, or product management.
Thank you. All right, so I put Alex's newsletter in the chat for anybody who wants to subscribe. I also put the Legal Mentor Network website there if you're interested in learning more about Mentor Network or signing up as a mentor or a mentee. You can go there. Alex, before we thank you and say goodbye, any final comments or closing remarks?
No, none. Thanks for having me. Shout out to you, Heather, and to the Legal Mentor Network for having me on. And for all of you who are attending, I would say, you know, whether you're a law student or junior lawyer, just try to figure out where you fit in. There are going to be times where you're going to feel like, oh my God, I'm at the wrong job, or what's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. Everyone has a unique set of strengths and weaknesses, and it's only a question of where that place is that you've got to go. Doesn't have to be outside of the law. It doesn't have to be legal tech, but it's got to be somewhere where you really feel like you fit in. So best of luck to all of you. Again, thanks again, Heather, Legal Mentor Network. Really an honor to be here.
Alex, thank you so much for coming. Everyone, thank you for spending your time on this weekday during the working hours. We appreciate your being here. Alex, your insights are always wonderful. I didn't get you to tell any jokes, so everyone should just go check out Alex's TikTok if you need a little humor. But thank you all very much for being here, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.